think it's a little bit better here, a bit closer. My name is Bożena Gierat-Bieroń, the Institute of European Studies of the Jagiellonian University, and I will have the pleasure to run the second part of our conference.
This second part of the conference starts now at 1:15 and lasts until 3:15. The first part, to which I am now very cordially inviting you to, is a lecture by Professor Zeidler-Janiszewska from the Higher Psychology School, culture scientist, author of fantastic articles printed by most prestigious titles in culture sciences. So the floor is yours. I am sorry, but I cannot hear the speaker, so I cannot interpret. I am sorry, I didn't notice. I am not too familiar with this type of technology. Let me please start from the fact that unlike, maybe not as much unlike, but in a slight contrast to the previous speakers, I would like to emphasize that it seems to me that abolishing, doing away, or loosening the tension between the variety of contemporary societies and solidarity with people other than we are, I am using a translation from David Goodhart's paper, is something that we cannot achieve without changes at the level of economy and system. This is not what we are experts in. We don't involve, at least as it seems to me, in alter-globalist movements. I follow their theory to a certain extent, so this is not something I'm going to go into too much detail. Yet let me tackle a problem of how the current practices in art can contribute to a change in attitudes that perceive in people other than me enemies or aliens. The difference between an enemy and alien has enjoyed quite rich literature, with Georg Simmel beginning and ending with the book on modernity and ambivalence by Zygmunt Bauman. Obviously and naturally, more broadly and more specifically, this will be tackled in less than half an hour by my colleagues. Yet, let me begin with a few words on the philosophical inspirations. In the closing sections of the paper that I knew beforehand, thanks to the kind organizers, David Goodhart discussed the need for the introduction of a new language that would efficiently escape the old opposition between universalism and particularism, especially of the ethnic nature. I would like to reiterate that a similar idea was had by Richard Rorty, an American philosopher, when he put forth his vision of liberalist utopia. In the book that we discussed and read lively in the 1990s in Poland, the goal behind this liberal utopia was defined by Rorty as something very simple, namely a progressing process of perceiving in the others, not them, but some of us. A process in which the deepening of the knowledge of the other is accompanied by the readiness to redefine ourselves. On top of that, he emphasized, and that is going to be crucial for the further part of my presentation here, that today this goal is served better no longer by a philosophical treatise or a sermon, but rather by an ethnographic description, report, comic strip, semi-documentary, and primarily a novel that is of special interest to Roti. It goes without saying, however, that novels and the belles lettres as such no longer play the social and educational role that they did in the earlier phase of modernity. Being cautious in what we say, today there is more competition to novel than there used to be in its educational capacity. Although we agree with Bakhtin, Kundera and Jonathan Kahler that it is a very special genre as it invites a variety of listeners and readers already in the aspect of its formal development to the creation of an open community. So although we agree to it, we acknowledge that our pictures of the world and the related images today are rather shaped within the audiovisual practice, which is a broad field. So it is not a coincidence that the visual arts today no longer plastic but just visual. I wouldn't fully agree to it because this is a term that narrows them down quite a bit. Working in an opposition to the culture of a spectacle, in a way take over the role that earlier was vested in the belles lettres. Their representatives often resign from the autonomy won by their predecessors, building not only hybrid from the point of view of traditional divisions of arts, but apart from those figurations, they also enter various alliances with other social practices of social philosophical nature. Yet, before I deal more specifically with this question, let me please remind you of another important source of inspiration to renew the source of the language around the problems that gather us here today. And this is also related to a certain vision of hospitality formed by Jacques Derrida. Derrida tried to breathe some life through it to a more traditional idea related to the idea of cosmopolitanism, to two spaces, the weakening in its functions, the state weakening in its functions, and the city, or in plural, cities that are becoming clearly emancipated from state structures. The basic elements of the vision were presented in a text, Cosmopolitans of All Countries, Yet Another Effort. The text was prepared for the first Congress of the so-called Cities of Asylum held in March 96 at the seat of the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. A few months earlier, the second convention of the International Council of Writers by the initiative of Derrida, Rajdi Bushi, and others with the support of the authorities of Strasbourg and the Council of Europe, issued an appeal which was very efficient to create the European network of refuge cities, which would welcome writers who are persecuted in various parts of the world. Earlier, the mayor of Almeida, a Spanish city, prepared an appropriate document. The network was joined also by 2 American cities. Derrida's text puts a value on this initiative in a more general scale that pertains to all the aliens, all the displaced people, all the foreigners, and is a true challenge for true innovation in the history of the right of asylum or the duty of hospitality. That's a phrase from the text. In a word, to create new cosmopolitanism integrated with creation of hospitality, ethics of hospitality, obviously practiced not only towards the people who are famous for their achievements and are known by name, which is the case with the writers, but towards all those who, in the eyes of the European locals, are anonymous, drowned in a darkness from which they find it difficult to struggle, which is the root of other evils in their various forms. I shall return to this phrase, yet it is worth reiterating that in this perspective, the biblical tradition of the 6 cities of refuge for the aliens who settled among us, this is from the book of Numbers, a tradition continued in the Middle Ages, which found its philosophical grounds in the writings of Cicero and in letters of St. Paul. Derrida also mentioned that the word alien used to be understood as guest, and the metoids were the foreigners, but at the same time neighbors, foreigners who settled in the city and became our neighbors. We are certain to find this tradition in the Italian Lampedusa that has been recently mentioned, where in one of the grottos by the local sanctuary, every person who came there, independent of origin and the place of origin, could find the means of sustenance, which they left later to other newcomers. This can be Lampedusa, but this can also be New York. In this context, we can remind that absolutely independent of Derrida's initiative, entering this tradition, filtered in a way through an essay of Levinus, was alluded to by Krzysztof Wodiczko, who proposed a whole range of initiatives that would make it possible to consider New York as the city to which you escape, the city where you can learn, the city where you can develop practices supporting the construction of a certain community better than the one we know. A justification for Wodiczko's project lay in the observation of the behaviors of the people of New York after the 9/11. What is obvious and what we all saw in the media, New York became a huge single place of remembrance, monuments, a place of really commemoration of the victims. Secondly, however, it turned into a forum of broad public and spontaneous discussions, whose large number warned against the revangism, against a policy that was later taken up by the contemporary state government or state authorities. A continuation of this spontaneous discussion of those warning voices was an initiative that we know already less about, an initiative by a group of people who lost their loved ones, an initiative of going to Afghanistan in peaceful, with peaceful objectives. It was also broadly discussed. It reinforced this anti-war front. There's quite a broad visual documentation of those events, posters, prints. There is also an audio library. Wodiczko proposes that artists build certain forms that would continue this spontaneous anti-retaliation policy in a form of some basic network for such initiatives that would attract to New York all those who feel uncertain, who feel threatened for a variety of reasons, but also ones who would like to develop, to emancipate in themselves in contacts with others. Wodiczko, in a way, doesn't really refer to Derrida. The concept of New York as a city of refuge comes through Levinas, and he presents this concept which is tantamount to the previous one. Obviously, a modern option of this philosophical tradition are the conditions of common hospitality formed by Immanuel Kant, also the ones that are the conditions for the eternal peace for all the earthlings. As we know, Kant envisaged this law which he regulated, which he boiled down to the right to stay, the relationships between sovereign states. Today we could say that things follow what Kant envisaged, but we don't consider his solution satisfactory. We have more hopes in the cities, larger, smaller, or just hamlets, as I mentioned. Lampedusa, I've just mentioned. The appeal of this group of intellectuals and the European Parliament was spontaneously answered by representatives of small, large, and also medium-sized cities. The network of those cities of refuge, as Derrida wrote, can be the spearhead of experiments and also a model that is more stronger here in policy that supports immigrants and is also related to the ambivalence of the policy towards immigrants, for example, using the example of France. The bridgeheads mentioned here bring me to the main subject of my address. These bridgeheads are plenty among the contemporary artistic practices which make no reference whatsoever to this type of philosophical inspirations. These practices, only to a small scope, make reference to the visual arts, which organized around a criterion proper for the media, were identified with the visual representation of the external world in the categories of beauty. This is the tradition which, speaking of obvious things here, were very efficiently challenged by European avant-gardes, and we continue to see its dismantling. Symptomatic of it is the change of the language in which the aesthetics of the theory of art and criticism speak of what is their object. Today we commune not with works, but rather with works, installations, events, or just only inspired by artists, frequently situated beyond the institutions of art and entering the fields of others, relatively autonomized practices of modern culture. Yet we still use the general formula of art, always rendering it more and more flexible, which takes place not only in reference to the visual arts, but also music, theatre and literature. This visible turning away from the work towards the blurring, if not obliteration, of borders of art broadens the realm of consumers of this art. They don't feel forced to be legitimized with sophisticated artistic competences at the entrance point. This type of differences that was mentioned or analyzed by Pierre Bourdieu is slowly done away with. One of the chapters of Carl Foster's famous book, The Return of the Real Avant-Garde at the Turn of the Century, was titled An Artist as an Ethnographer, or simplifying, an artist as someone who deals with the cultural other. The American critic analyzed the forms of this dealing in the context, on the one hand, of structuralist philosophy of the difference, and also shaping post-colonial studies, and in the context of political programs in the 1980s and 1990s. On the one hand, he really said that there is the trap of excessive identification with the other, perceiving it in the categories of a offering of devotion. On the other hand, of this murderous attempt on their behalf, which lets the right-wing groupings to start speaking of hatred and violence. The book ends in the definition of the third road that leads to the development of forms of critical distance that he defines in relationship to the genealogy of morality of Nietzsche, and they would be free from the noble pathos and also from resentment. People accompanying art, going around it, want to rejuvenate the language and oppose the lack of hostility in case of people we treat as aliens or enemies. Now, I would like to pass on. Sorry. These are somebody's glasses, and I just dropped them. Let me now pass to a very brief analysis of things that are strongly contrasted. Then my colleagues are going to discuss many other activities. To me, what I have chosen is of model quality for the third road that can be seen as a different path than the one that is related to the Universalis Particularis. These actions, the actions that I'm going to refer to, receive theoretical comments and they become encrusted with those. Although in the case of the first, those comments focus mostly on the new type of public art, the art that is called the collaborative art, the art of collaboration-based art. At that, let me emphasize that the first, I'll tell you in a moment what, is something that I know only from documentation, especially from a fantastic film of an artist living in Austria. He's an artist of film and the avant-garde stage, Paul Paulette. And in the second event, I participated myself, at least in one version of this second event, possibly here in the room. There are also people who participated in the latter, or at least could participate in the latter as well. Let me use this opportunity to note that it is worthwhile to discuss a whole group of initiatives, including notably, for example, the activity of the Viennese Volkstheater Karawane, a group who fight for zones without borders, or the Documenta 10 activities of the International Network of Subversive Practices, following the slogan "No human is illegal." Yet I am skipping those because practically they don't have an artistic dimension, or although yes, they attracted artists in the design phase, this dimension was however reduced, and these were political activities that dominated, and the art became withdrawn in a way from those. This process of withdrawal of artists from such initiatives was analyzed fairly precisely and commented upon after the design of monument. First there were questions about the form, and then making something that would be a monument in this non-traditional sense, devoted to the unknown helpers, ADs, in escapes. For example, an act like in the last days, for example, having the residents of Lampedusa nominated for Nobel Peace Prize. The monument never originated simply because there were quarrels between the anarchist politicians who withdrew artists in a way from this project. Really worthy of interest was this milieu, because those artists try to do many very useful things in Europe. Is focused around a magazine an online zine that no longer exists, Republic Art, and and a whole range of interesting books whose intention is seeking for paths to win over the things we are discussing here today. Now let me discuss in greater detail those two events that in a way are contrastive and that I believe can provide good examples of exceedingly successful artistic interventions into the search for that third path. The first of them is something you must have heard about, designed by a German artist, Christoph Schlingensief, in the center of Vienna in year 2000 as part of the Wiener Festwochen. It was entitled Bitte liebt Österreich, the first Austrian coalition book, Love Austria, full stop, the first week of the Austrian coalition. The course of this week can be seen in a variety of film and photo documentation, and the texts are also discussed online. The most interesting here is the film mentioned here, the poet Alexander Raus, Schlingensief contained. It was a Brechtian comment to the political situation in Austria after Jörg Haider's party entered the government, not only the structures of parliamentary democracy, but also, as I mentioned, the government. This is the first project, and the second one is the itinerant itinerant installation, and in this way, contrastive to Schlingensief, Ikebal's installation entitled Nic się nie stało, Nothing's Happened. In Poland, we could see it at the exhibition entitled Anabasis, the rituals of going back home, of the return home, organized during the Four Cultures Festival in Łódź in 2009.
The performance designed by Schlingensief was multi-form provocation, and it was in the center of Vienna, that is at Fort Koreans Square, and just in front of the Opera House. The artist placed a big container, rather a set of containers, living containers, and there they simulate the conditions of a center for refugees not far from Vienna, and there were people from Kosovo, Iran, Iraq, Zimbabwe, Ceylon, Albania, and Kurdistan, and those were the people who in that center were waiting for their decision as to their further fate. And above the container there was a very visible banner with the inscription Ausländer raus, which was against the refugees out, and also the FPÖ flag, and also the logotype of the right-wing newspaper, that the Kommentar, which supports Haider. And whatever refugees were doing inside the container was as if in a Big Brother program. It was actually broadcast via the internet, and the viewers from Austria, not only in Austria, there were quite active participants of that show, and they had to to cast their ballots also by phone. And as a result of that ballot, every evening at 8 p.m., two of the temporary occupants of that container were forced to leave it, accompanied by men dressed in black, and they had the security logo on their black shirts with all the ambivalence, and of course you could see all of the ambivalence of that word security. So they were getting into a car with Austrian emblems, which was to suggest that they were being deported into the unknown. And of course they were returning the censor. But unlike the Big Brother participants, the refugees were doing that with their faces covered with newspapers and in wigs. And the winner was to get a lump sum of money as well as Austrian citizenship under the condition that there will be a person ready to marry. And this is how the citizenship would be granted that person, that someone would marry that person. Slingerschiff every day was the master of ceremony, and he was warming up the emotions of people using all sorts of ways to do so, especially the bystanders. Actually, the bystanders on the square could approach the container, they could actually look into and see what was going on inside it using special visors. He was also broadcasting recordings of Haider's speeches and so on and so forth, and he was using the loudspeakers to coax the members of the party to take the banner off. He was enticing viewers to cast their ballots, and he was giving comments about people leaving the container that was very much reminiscent of the nationalistic rhetorics. So what in fact he wanted to do was to show different points of view. Now, what did he make? What was he successful with? In fact, that situation presented in an emotional way many different points of view. And there were all sorts of discussions directly on the squares at homes as people were watching it as live broadcast, and actually the daily number of viewers was increasing. And of course in the mass media there was quite a lot of movement, not only in the Austrian mass media but also in Germany. And since the very beginning, being very much active, he actually filmed 100 hours of documentaries, and he made a documentary movie. So right now you can see find in the internet many of the fragments of that movie. But in fact, one can buy a DVD as well. And that documentary is also filled with interviews of politicians and artists and intellectuals. And Elfriede Elinek was running that show as if it were a marionette show. And Burkhard Schmidt, for instance, a German philosopher, was there, or Peter Sloterdijk was there as well. And they knew about all of that show as well. But the movie was accompanied by many discussions. Actually, the scripts of those discussions are also available in the internet. And what people were thinking about it was whether this ridiculing of love to Austria, that is love to motherland, is being ridiculed, whether that was proper, because there was a lot of there were many associations to typical Austrian gemütlich iconology, and there were many references made to nationalist imagery as well. And so the question was whether this ridiculing would be a sign of warning, not only for the newcomers but also for the entire Europe. Because what happened in Austria, if you remember well, in fact that was the first type of such an event in a post-war Europe, that in a country like that a political party actually entered the parliament and became a member of the government as well. And also in that performance or spectacle, or however you call it, by the way, because as far as the genre of this multifaceted multifaceted undertaking is concerned, there have been many different aesthetical and theoretical concepts how to describe it. In any case, Shingenzib also wanted to ridicule by means of it the indolence of the left and of the liberal center. But on the other hand, he quoted, and he was ridiculing, yes, he was quoting them, he was actually ridiculing the remarks of politicians and the way politicians were responding to this performance and to what happened in Austria. And in these discussions, one of the questions was, for instance, some of the participants were highly active in playing their roles, the roles that were presented to them by the producer. Many people were very much active in casting their ballots. Many people were very active in casting their ballots so as to get rid of the subsequent participants of the show. And so the question was whether that would block real activities that were happening in the real. And one of the discussions, Sloterdijk compared these activities to the activities of a physician, the physician that was vaccinating a patient so as to protect the patient against the infectious diseases, but also it was protecting the patients against autoimmunological diseases. And usually autoimmunological diseases fight the organism better than external diseases. So he is, in fact, he was compared with other Austrian artists, with Beschmutzer or with Thomas Bertram. And those are the artists who were presenting societies with mirrors so that the society could look at the ugly side of its own face. So due to this multifaceted and very much spectacular Schlingersip's project, in fact, reverberated in much further milieus than it was initially intended. In fact, he was brutally ridiculing the others, but also he was very much critical, and that was also reverberated in literature, and so it gave food for thought to such people who most probably were not reading Jelinek and were not reading Orwell, by the way, so as to link to Roger's idea that exemplifies Orwell's output, creative output. And many people had not been thinking initially about the atrocities that others were resorting to and that the atrocities were apt to. So if we are to interpret that particular performance, so to speak, and if we are to take into consideration all of the discourse that has taken place and is still taking place, then we can actually come to the following conclusion. We can see, we can actually make the following comment. Schlingensief was successful with creating such a public space which has got this agonistic character. So in fact he created a space that is warning against antagonizing, because in fact antagonizing many times leads to violence. So that was one example. Now, of course, in the German press, that was received as an example of a different model of functioning of the public sphere, and in fact it was very much different than democracy, legal-based democracy as presented by Habermas. But now let me pass on to a contrasting example. We also have quite a number of other practices, examples of other practices, and they are done in a more positive mode, more chamber-like mode, but still they are capable of getting us involved. So I spoke about one event, but there are many other events by Christopher Schlingerzew, and in the second case, it refers to Mikebal, a Dutch lady. She has quite a number of activities. She's a curator, movie maker, and so on and so forth. But let me focus on just one of the projects of hers. She's got this installation that is in the process of creation since 2006. For many years, it was being complemented with further elements. I don't know whether the installation is already complete or not yet. And it was being complemented with additional elements depending on the space where it was presented. Mikebal was negotiating, for instance, in St. Petersburg. She wanted to show that installation in St. Petersburg, and she had to move the deadlines so as to make 2 additional movies with women, with Russian women, so as to complement this image of mothers, the image of mother that is being presented in this installation. And this is many screen type of video installation with an author's commentary with quite a title. This situation of being lost and profound transformation. The installation and the text are a part of a broader project which is being implemented with the use of 2 media or 2 different modes of presentation. One is research activity and the other form is artistic form. And this is they've called the aesthetics of migration. That is the name of the project. It's not migrations aesthetics, by the way, but aesthetics of migration, which she actually underscores. And that installation is based on a very simple idea, by the way. The author shows that installation in many different rooms that depend to arts institutions, but not only. Sometimes she uses universities, offices, and other public spaces to show this installation. The point is that these spaces must be rather small. She positions furniture, usually comfortable furniture, armchairs, and monitors, and the viewer may sit comfortably as if at home and focus entirely on the projection of a 30-minute video material. Then the viewer moves into another armchair, may return to the previous one and watch it again, and so on. Now, those video materials were made in many different parts of the world. 2 of them were made actually in Poland, not far from Krakow, when she came here to take part in workshops for curators. And the characters that play in those movies, those are specific women mentioned by their names and surnames, and they talk about their relations with children who left their own homes and countries, and they had left their homes for many different reasons, political or economic. So those women are giving an interview to someone they actually know very well, or maybe friends with, but you do not see the interlocutor. So they sometimes speak to someone who actually was physically not there as the interview was being taken with that woman. So, in fact, that woman could have been talking to a person she had known only on the basis of photographs or letters. So, for instance, she could also as if talk to a grandchild of her own. But only at the very end we see the environment of the woman, and then we just stay with these women, so you can see a portrait picture of that woman and the voice. They speak their own languages, and there are subtitles, and the subtitles are in the language of the viewer. So actually the text goes right above the face so as not to interfere with the perception of the face. So as not to interfere with the perception of the portrait. And so mothers speak about longing, but also pride, because their children are having better lives somewhere abroad. The viewer in the armchair is looking at the face of the woman, catches the emotional character of the voice, actually establishes contact with the woman, understands that woman, regardless of the cultural barriers. And this is the way how the viewer can understand that perhaps this man or that woman that you happen to meet on a staircase, on the flights of stairs, or in the Chinese restaurant, maybe these people, they're not only migrants, maybe they do have their own mothers somewhere out there in that big world. And maybe their mothers are struggling with them being away, because those are the portraits of women, and those women, they describe the situations they're facing. And this reminds us, the viewers, about the things that link us or unite us with those other people. It's not only children leaving their mothers. It's not only children who are trying to find their new place. But it's also about us, because we, the viewers, we're also people who live in culturally diverse environment, and then we experience the profound transformation of us. So we perceive the mobility of the others. We also understand that we ourselves move around a lot, at least like tourists. Maybe we're not moving around. So she says, as the author, once the viewer takes this effort to establish interaction, then that transformation is experienced. If it happens, and it happens due to the discourse, then that experience is actually quite joyful. And in a public space, such as an arts gallery, this is quite an unheard of type of experience. So what are the conclusions? So once we see the face and hear the voices of other us, as she calls it, then we find ourselves in them. We see ourselves in their situation, in their shoes, so to speak. We see what is uniting factor, what are uniting factors for us and not the dividing factors. All of a sudden, we get out of the social autism, and then the transformed us will no longer be indifferent to the others, and we will actually use the Jacques Derrida's hospitality principle. So we will be coaxed to self-criticism, or perhaps it will help us to create better interactions with culturally others. So as you can see, artists are not the masters of emancipating those others. Here we see the artists are not lawmakers. The artists are not, to referring to Bauman's position, in fact the artists are interpreting, maybe they're not interpreting and they're not translators, they're not translating rather Ramsey's way, they're masters, or perhaps ignorance. Master ignorance. They merely create conditions for the development of a certain self-expression, self-presentation of ourselves and of others. So this is auto-emancipation, and this is a way to build something that is better than we know in the society. So one might say that what I'm talking about does not really refer Poland, if we are to compare Poland with France or Great Britain for that matter. Poland seems to be a monocultural country, almost monocultural country, but still, at the same time, it does describe the current moods, and it may describe the future attitudes. It would suffice to think that sometimes we feel indignation when the press writes writes that our guys are being ill-treated abroad, that they earn not enough money, that they're being abused, and so on and so forth, that they stand no chances. But then we ourselves, we are very much disrespectful with regard to those who come to Poland to work, and therefore we disrespectfully speak of Russians, Belarusians, Ukrainians, Romas and Gypsies. So it shows, in fact, that it does pertain to us here in Poland as well. So in fact, that installation is very much fits those who live in multicultural countries and those countries that seem to be more monocultural. Thank you. Microphone, please. No mic, no interpretation. I'm afraid I have no idea what the speaker says without the mic. And the mic still doesn't work. I'm sorry, I have no idea what's going on. As an interpreter, I have to switch off because I don't hear anything.
Borowskiego, pana Redbada Klijnstrę. I to chyba tyle.
Our panel will be called the title How is the idea of multiculturalism expressed in arts, culture and social activity of today. Witek, you have this presentation. Shall we begin with your presentation? Maybe we'll feature your presentation first. Witek Hebanowski, president of the Przestrzeń, which is Other Space Foundation. Hello.
Tak może krótko tytułem wstępu, ponieważ reprezentujemy dość dziwaczną organizację.
We're quite a strange organization that we are. We are a foundation organization. We juxtapose many different elements that seem to be incompatible whatsoever. This is Trans-Caucasus Festival, for instance. That is the only festival inspired by modern Caucasus where Armenia and Armenians and Azerbaijani meet. Otherwise they don't, because they fight a war. Or, for instance, those are coaches school in Burma in the state of Shan, and then they train educators, electoral educators, so they actually train local communities in many different areas of the state of Shan. In the Union of Myanmar, teach them to vote. Also, they teach them how to disclose falsification of elections. And another picture is the Tibetan program, because in fact in our foundation we have a group and their objective is to create a movement for free Tibet and to promote human rights in Tibet. And we call it the Spring of Nations. And as you can see, Tunisians used to be one of our first actions that we actually organized by that Tibetan group. But now let us talk about our main field of expertise, which is multiculturalism. And an obvious point, migration influences our culture, and this is clearly seen, it is obvious. And as I was listening to the previous presentations, I just added two more illustrations that show that all too well. But for migration, the Polish composer, Polish-French composer, would not have given pride to Poland, the musician, but in fact the global musical heritage would lose a lot. And that all happened in the 19th century due to migration of the gentleman, or two brothers, rather four brothers, the Wąsel family brothers. They left a small village in Mazowieckie, they left for the United States of America, and there they created the famous Warner Brothers Corporation. So, just for the four Jews who sold their horse, left for the US from the Mazowsze area, then we would miss one of the largest movie corporation in the world. And now, I was a little bit afraid about this multiculturalism talk. Is it a crisis or is it not? It is an important question, it is. But sometimes we have these tendencies to ask questions that create illusions. And in Poland we have this demographics situation, as you can see. What you see actually is just a bit of a report that was published by the Office of National Security. This report is dispatched to many organizations, institutions. What we see, decreasing population in Poland and the process of aging, and so will influence negatively the retirement system, the labor market, and so on and so forth. And it's interesting that it is actually the National Security Office that speaks of that, and they say that the poor demographics will have negative influence on the internal and external security of Poland. So we're speaking about something very real, and no matter how rigid we become about anti-abortion rules, but none of the governments would forbid women to have many children, and good migration policy becomes one of the key factors, not just important, it's actually a key factor for Poland to cope with civilizational challenges in the future. Yet another chart from the same report, from the same document. This is the comparison of Spain and Poland. In 1990, Poles and Spanish have a very similar size of the population. In 2006, the difference between Poland and Spain, according to this forecast, and that's the Eurostat data, by the way, the difference will be of 20 million. So we see that demographics would have a larger say than was in the past. So we don't have even to think how politicians talk about multiculturalism, whether there is a crisis of multicultural policy, but we have to be specific and think what is it that Poland is doing, whether we are influencing the development of situation in our cities, for instance. What should cities do so as to provide for good migration management, and how to attract migrants? Now, what do we do in this regard?
First of all, our philosophy is more focused on working not for immigrants but with immigrants. That's a Chechen center which was founded by really Chechens, with our support, but by Chechens. Chechens who came to us and said we want to have our own space. That was the need of the leader of the Chechen diaspora finally said that he feels happy because so far young Chechens didn't have their space and they were more isolated from their peers as well. Now, with their small center of culture and education, they invite their peers. They are proud because they can show something that from them they became more integrated, so there is no dilemma between assimilation and plummeting or cherishing the culture of the country of their origin. Here is the campaign that they wanted to do, solidarity with Boston. because there was the hate speech turning up among the American community portals towards Chechens. That was a natural reaction. They wanted to do it, and they did it. Another project that we do is something we do with other organizations, go to other level. We work with 20 organizations, 5 or 6 offices, and we build a multifunctional center. These are workshops where we are planning our space together. We convinced the city that it makes sense not only to design what this restoration is to be, but also that many various institutions of those diasporas had the sense of fatherhood and motherhood of this project. This is the team who planned it. Now I'm very glad to note that we're going to an even higher level. The Polish state has no idea how to promote it. The national strategy is hardly coherent with the reality. The Polish state recently prepared a document, and the new act on the foreigners makes absolutely no reference to this document. So with a number of organizations in Poland, we decided that we must act on behalf of the decision makers, and in a working form we are working now on 3 forums on city immigration policies. In 2 weeks such a forum will take place in Krakow with Krakow. Closing, an example from an entirely different area of our activity, who we send when we promote Polish culture abroad. One of the best examples of what we managed to do in the context of music was inviting as Polish music ambassadors of music from Poland, or Warsaw musicians from Senegal who in Georgia represented Poland, or rather Warsaw, and working with Georgian musicians. We have Pakosara from Senegal and Cheneburebi. They make things that were fantastic, worked as new musical projects, and also one that was very favorably accepted by a very strong folk festival, where the audiences are members of various folk bands. So this is the Pakosar who really stole the limelight, stole the show. We have here also Ifi Wuda, who is a Polish-Nigerian vocalist from Warsaw. Now, a word of conclusion. I was very glad as these voices that come from the countries where this experience of migration has been much longer. But let's remember that Poland, before the Second World War, was one of the most multicultural cities. Until the Second World War, Warsaw was the largest Jewish city by the Second World War. What I hear now is very close to me and to my thinking of philosophy. This policy towards migrants should on one hand respect the fundamental laws, and there should be no release of migrant group from respecting the rule of law. So this is a key in a way, but for that to operate, we must have the sense of values that we share. We must redefine values at the level of Poles, British, and I feel that politicians and bureaucracy of the EU are far from what we should do, what we should have in Europe. Following also the standard of the American Constitution, we should see that a guest who comes to visit us must understand what they are. This is a good example of an Austrian company, Julius Mine. There is also a bottom-up campaign where Julius Mine, or rather its logo, the little black boy from a very colonial design form, begins to rebel. It's his revolution. He presses down on that top hat, and that's a very large reaction of a company that is largest and deals with sweets. So this deals with responsibility, and on the other hand, we must understand that it is so that there are various people coming to us. We must learn certain flexibility, that a lack of those policies that we don't see that they have their leaders, that we can talk to them. This will never let us accept or assimilate those values. The respect of the other lets us respect also our values. So it is very difficult, but it is a very significant connection. On the one hand, the rule of law, and on the other, a certain ability to understand the local community, the people in the structure of migrant groups who come to us. So as to close on that somewhat provocative note, we could learn a lot from Jamaica, certainly not in the context of treating the LGBT community or in the context of managing crime. There they are such specific questions. This is a motto. Out of many, one people. It is not one nation, it's one people of Europe in our case. That's a motto that is really worthwhile treating as a good lesson in what those very strong nations of the Caribbean have achieved. So there is plenty of place to learn from those non-typical groups and this unorthodox way of thinking about the world. Now, Zuzia will probably say a few words about a project that is the largest cultural migrant project in Poland. I've been asked to prepare a multicultural Warsaw Street Party, but we love speaking about our projects. I wouldn't be myself if I didn't. That's something else. Warsaw of many cultures, continent Warsaw, a very autonomous program of Inna Przestrzeń, Other Space Foundation. Our main activity is running a website where we provide information about the events related to various cultures. It's not only the foreigners, but also various non-governmental organizations, event groups, and this all is connected to multiculturality. There's a powerful information database on our website about institutions, places related to multiculturality. These are the NGOs started by foreigners who live in Warsaw. These are shops, restaurants, all those which were founded by foreigners. We have a huge database of people who deal with all the artistic projects. It's about 1,000 major and minor bits of information about Warsaw. Besides the portal, we run also our own projects. It's called People from the Continent, for example. We present specific cultures. All-day long events where we present the works of foreign artists and also culture from the side of cooking or maybe handicraft. There are always artists, musicians performing on stage and showing their culture through music. Another project, Warsaw Multicultural Plein Air. These are the visual arts. We run workshops for foreigners as we also try to make them more active through culture. This does have an impact on the integration and also the Warsavians who live in our city. And now the core, the Multicultural Warsaw Street Party, a project that came to be soon after Continent Warsaw was established to entrust the city space to foreigners. As it turned out, there are plenty of institutions and people who want to show their culture, and that's why we organize the Multiculturalism Street Party. On the last Sunday of August, we take up Krakowskie Przedmieście Street. Most of you must have been to Warsaw. This is the street that leads to the old city, usually tourists and or people who just do their pub crawls. We take up Krakowskie Przedmieście, and on that day, the last Sunday of August, there are about 8,000 people from the monument to Copernicus to Miodowa, a few hundred meters that is. Here we show you a map in our city. There are about 60 stands of NGOs, also private people, kitchens, shops. These are the people who become involved year in, year out. We don't pay those people for performing on stage. We don't pay those who run workshops in the different zones, zone for children, zone of drumming. The Multicultural Warsaw Street Party begins with the Multicultural Parade, which goes along the main streets of the city. This is Marszałkowska Street, where we welcome not only people who come especially to our event, but also the drivers who are shocked to see what is happening, and the people who are they are not furious, they are happy that they can see the Multicultural Warsaw. The Multicultural Warsaw Street Party also includes presentations by foreigners and the forced migrants, the refugees. If we were to assess how many cultures there are, there might be well over 60 of those. And what I find very important in this Multicultural Warsaw Street Party is that foreigners and people promoting other cultures want to do it themselves. We really deal with logistics, legalizing the event, which ain't easy at all, really, as it turns out that the city doesn't necessarily want to see in one of its boutique streets a multicultural street party. Once we were even told, that was last year, that it's now organized for the last time in Krakowskie Przedmieście Street, but this year we managed to organize it again, the same space. So it's good. The stands, I've already mentioned the stands. These are the people who devote their time, their work, just throughout the day, because the event lasts from 2 to 10 p.m. They organize specific programs. They have also participation of other festivals that invite foreigners. We see here, pardon? Yes, the cultural crossroads. this is an event that really attracts the entire community of Warsaw. We are competition for none. We invite everyone. It's an event open for everyone. There's a special children's zone to integrate people of Warsaw from their earliest years. This is Nokcio. These are the Chechen refugees, and children run workshops for children. Other workshops, martial arts, dance, they are all run by foreigners with artists on the stage from all the possible corners of the world. That's what we are keen on, that they may show their culture through dance, through various workshops. There are calligraphy workshops, origami workshops. There's always a special tent with games. Getting to know different cultures carries plenty of different aspects. The picture I'm showing you comes from this year. The Warsaw Multicultural Street Party was held for the 7th time this year, and at the same time for the first time, really. So far we've always had co-financing from the capital city, so it was in a way a municipal event. This year we got none. The street party was held despite the fact that its budget was 0 zloty. I don't know if you know, but you've got to pay for everything, even for putting up a tent, a single tent. You've got to pay for it, you've got to pay for protection, for the ambulance that is available. We managed to do it only because the co-organizers, that's the companies and NGOs, just filled our kitty. A few thousand zloty, not more than that. All the co-organizers just joined the pot to co-organize the event. Paraphrasing the title of our conference, we can say that multiculturality actually works. It works in Warsaw. Our time is nearly over, so let me speed up our discussions somewhat. So before I ask Ms. Mayor to answer the question, I'd like to ask you, Redbad. You do the O Holender festival. You are Holender, that is a Dutch by origin. How come that you have this need to run a festival on multiculturality, on your state, on the promotion of your culture in our country, in our place? How come you had that need to organize this event? I'm a great fan of Multicultural Street Party, and I must have been to nearly all of them, but my O Holender feast really stems from this internal need, working and striving with multiculturality in me. I'm a half Pole and half Dutch. And yes, I had to reach this conclusion at a certain point in time that unless I integrate these two cultures in myself, there's going to be nothing of it. I'll come to a very bad end. And some 7 years ago, I believe, I came to understand that these two sides in me, Polish and Dutch, need to start collaboration. I cannot be always fully a Pole or fully a Dutchman, depending on where I am. It is so that in the Netherlands I'm a Pole. When I'm in Poland, I'm perceived as a Dutchman. In Poland, I play a Dutch physician who comes to Poland and finds things weird, and there I play in the Netherlands a Polish construction worker who's always taking things with a pinch of salt. Now, organization of this festivity was also the result of my decision that I will connect my future to Poland, because for various reasons I find Poland more pleasant, but I need certain elements. One thing I did opening my cafe, that was opening a space where you can talk. Very Dutch tradition cafe where you can talk. One thing is that there is no music, so that the debate and the talking are the most important element in the set design of the place. Something that must be the finest thing that the Dutch may be proud of, at least in my opinion, is the annual Queen's birthday. Beginning with this year, it's going to be the King's birthday. So a national holiday, a national festivity that is very constructive, very positive. And as I learned later when I started translating it, I realized that this is a festivity that the Dutch Queen invented in a very conscious manner, because through fun it promotes certain basic values that make Holland: entrepreneurship, freedom of expression and creativity. So what I struggled against with at the festival, I didn't want to make an event that promotes Dutch culture. That's not my role, that's not my task. There must be other centers working on that, and definitely not in this form where there is plenty of noise and little content. But the image of the Netherlands was very useful in attracting people, and the image of the Queen herself. What was the most interesting here must have been the most unique element of this Queen's birthday. These are the children who already now start experiencing what it means to have a free market, what my proposal means, whether somebody likes it or not. And in fact, my unique proposal for those people and testing of what throngs, what group of people can be attracted here, that's probably the most interesting achievement. I was really keen on promoting the entrepreneurial attitude. So this had also a cognitive function, didn't it? Yes, so that we could get to know the best Dutch features, or what you consider best. Yes, ones that I believe to be very useful. I'm speaking from my experience as a director working with actors. I still lack. And I found that surprising, although I work with people who no longer remember the previous system. It seems to me that there is something in the mentality, something of certain passivity. You mean the Polish mentality? Yes. Many people in Poland have ideas, but in a way cannot implement them. I'm interested in supporting the process from the idea to its implementation, this positive freedom. If we are in a country that is free, why don't we start using all this? Let's be the owners, proprietors of our street. This is one of the elements of this festivity. Suddenly, people in the street realize that you can throw all the cars out from the street. How beautiful it is. That's what takes place in the Multicultural Street Party. A slight change of the point of view, showing that we do it without money, because for some reason, in our case, the city doesn't believe it proper to support us. Obviously, I'm somewhat supported here by certain Dutch companies, but in fact, that's done without money. And this also shows, well, about my communication, very often communication with the media, is that I organize a space, I give electricity, all the hygiene, security, but what the festivity is going to be depends on Warsaw locals. So there is in it some mission that you want to teach the Polish society that is still not too open to other nations. That's your mission, isn't it? Or is it just your passion, your way of life? I wouldn't dare to educate. No, the great effect was that you could see this Dutchman from the close distance. The few hundred of Dutchmen who live in Warsaw arrived, and for them it was unusual to see a Pole at a close distance. The Dutch live in Konstancin, get into their cars, go to their corporations, and the only Poles that they see are the Poles providing services for them. And here, the first time, they were very much afraid their children to be exposed here in the street. Oh, so you want this moment of integration, of meeting within a certain event to take place. Here it seems to me that it's not really about what is this pure education. No, it's getting to know the other. The people of Warsaw often come to the street party and say, oh my, so there is this multiculturality, there are those foreigners, because often in the everyday hustle and bustle we know, okay, there's this Indian restaurant or possibly a shop with all the sushi things. Yet those people have hardly any opportunity of meeting or just having fun together. I'd like to add on top of that O Holender played an absolutely unbelievable role in Kubusia Puchatka Street of Winnie the Pooh. Now when we are thinking whether we should name it to another military troop, and in the center of Warsaw there is a street that doesn't have a number. There is Kubusia Puchatka Street, and all the numbers, that's all the doors, entrances are from Nowy Świat. Let me emphasize that street party is unique because immigrants see that Warsaw is no longer mono-national. The street party won't solve the problem that, for example, a very important question are the initiatives like the cinema in 5 tastes, which was one of the only 2 in the world festivals of Vietnamese film.
That is to show professional culture from the countries of origin of migrants, just to show that the dialogue should be much more profound, that many times those migrants who used to sell the goods at the infamous stadium in Warsaw, those were actually broad and open-minded people. So these NGOs, they make quite a strong sector for integrating migrants. And I think that many of the Western institutions may learn a lot from Polish NGOs, who many times work on the grassroots level, and this is very much a bottom-up initiative. And yes, we have to talk about very important role of the Warsaw Street Party event, because, for instance, that event, the O Holender event, it was planned for just a few people, and then next year it was 3,000, now it's 5,000-7,000 people, and in fact we see representatives of many different cultures, and they also want to organize something like that, and I tried to explain them how to do that, but we have no system for that to allow those cultural groups to organize such events themselves. Well, in fact, here it is due to this foundation that we could do that, but these cultures have their own potential. Like in New York, any group would just organize their own street party, but in Warsaw it's so very difficult. It's so very much painstaking effort that is necessary to do that, and these people, they would like to manifest themselves. They don't even need any help. They simply don't need any not intimidation, but simply not one interrupting them. And in Warsaw there is killing bureaucracy. Yes, I just would like to ask you a question. So what are the Polish features that you would like to show in the Netherlands? Because, of course, there's quite a number of stereotypes about Poles there. Well, I would like to show that Poles have this historically conditioned cultural and systemical anti-systemics. So we are very much anti-systemic just for the sake of it. We are trying to be very much anti-systemic whenever any system is being imposed on us. So is it about non-subordination? No, it's about the Jamała camp. It is about this healthy attitude to what is being imposed on you. It's if something tells you it is not necessarily something needs to be followed. In the Dutch, for instance, as far as World War II is concerned, the Dutch were not thoughtful, and Germans as well, of course. But Poles have this feature: I simply don't believe what I'm being told from above. So whatever there is, if there is a word that finishes with ism, then we are being distrustful, like this communism, and then that was one of those isms that was never rooted well in Poland. We were like horseradish. We were red outside, white inside. Or how about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising? How about the Warsaw uprising that happened then 1944? So we're being creative under pressure. The Dutch are incapable of understanding of how is it to be creative under pressure, because the Dutch, they plan for everything. Everything must be planned. When I work with Dutch managers and I run these intercultural business workshops where I have representatives of both Dutch and Polish companies and they work together, so this Dutch manager for the Polish team would have a plan that consists of points and sub-points and sub-points. So a plan for a Dutch guy is already a fact. So anything that is not done according to the plan is a waste, is a loss. And if something is not achieved, that is incomprehensible, unthought of. And Poles sometimes were not really running those plans accordingly, doing the job quicker, faster, and doing it actually well. And this is something the Dutch could not understand. And I say you can't understand the Pole, you have to feel the Pole. And I'm saying that as a Dutch guy. So this creativity is one of the features. Once I saw that interview with the manager of an English factory. That was an interview taken a couple of years ago, and he said, I will have to fire a couple of people, but I'm not going to fire Poles, because Poles, if something is it breaks down, they simply don't sit, they simply think what to do about it. It's like that Polish plumber in France. Yeah, something like that. I once took an American Ford to travel to the Netherlands, and the American Ford had a failure somewhere in the Netherlands. So grandmother called for a mechanic. He opened up the hood and said, but it's a French engine in an American Ford. And he gave up. Then he was speaking for 30 minutes about his fascination about this little part that was invented by that Polish engineer that made it possible to combine an American car with a French engine. Tymek, to you now. I'm not really sure if by the way, Tymek is a celebrity of Polish modern painting, just for you to know. He's really talented. I mean, he is a gifted painter, and everyone knows about him in Poland. But unlike other colleagues, you are not really about multiculturalism in your painting work. I mean, it's not your theme, is it? You're not handling multiculturalism, although critics say that you're post-modern erudite of painting art. But as far as a modern painter is concerned, are you actually interested in those aliens? And if yes, what does that really mean to you? What does multiculturalism mean to you, for you as an artist, as a painter? Well, I think these inspirations and this immersion in multiculturalism is quite profound, especially in the visual field. And I'm dealing with visual arts. I'm interested in not only gallery style visual arts, not only museum-like visual arts. So I wasn't thinking even about it. I mean, it's obvious to me that you are becoming inspired by all sorts of sources of inspiration. And of course, once we were flooded with the internet and we saw the entire world just all of a sudden, just like that. Don't you think that this is the situation which may make an artist to be lost? I mean, all language is possible, all is permissible, and one might get lost. Well, an artist may get lost in any situation, even if you become very much locally particular. For instance, if you think only about the willow trees and peaceful rivers and so on, this is our Polish landscape, as they say. And then you get lost in it as well. I think it's quite specific a situation, because as far as this shallow perception is concerned, when you are like a tourist, all you see is just the surface, or like the modern form of your museum was created due to a Kunstkamera, which is a place where in one place we'll have mammoths' tusks and a calf with two heads and some paintings, all in one place. And as far as painting is concerned, painters use many different inspirations from many different sources, but in a very much superficial way. And I see it by myself. You see, when I enter a discourse, it's not multicultural discourse, no, it's just free use of many different outputs of human creativity and thoughts from many different cultures. It's quite curious, I'm quite curious about it, so I use it. But I think with all this method of work, and I think many modern artists would share with me this method of work, and this creative output it's not a political project, no, not at all. It's not about the affirmation of the idea of multiculturalism, no, it's not a political project. And today we cannot ask a question about what is beautiful. We are asking the question what art is, not what is beautiful, but what is the art. Well, in the modern world, one cannot ask this question, what is beautiful, because then it will become an oppressive question. It is unacceptable to ask about beauty. That's what people think. And I think the contrary. No, that's the basic question that I always ask. What is beautiful? When I'm dealing with a creative output and I want to be serious about it, I don't want to be joyfully affirmative about the activities of a cultural center. No. When we're talking about professional situations, when someone is serious about theater and arts, we need to value things, which means that we have to judge what is beautiful and what isn't. So, it's an interesting challenge for the arts right now, that is to create new subjectivized fields of valuing the arts, and sometimes it may be the result of the application of some exact sciences. For instance, there are we know how evaluation works and how advertising works, and we know how they measure the reaction of the brain of a viewer, so we can use this strictly scientific method of evaluating works of art and just testing in almost medical terms the way whether viewers like it or not. That's one of the ways. But on the contrary, on the totally different side of it, how about thinking about different ways. That is how to ask question about beauty. That is how to make the viewer to think about good art and bad art, to see what is beautiful and what isn't. Tymek Borowski once told me over the phone that in the today's globalized world we see the unification of cultures, because in many different geographical latitudes we see those smileys in the mobile phones, and we all understand the smileys in the mobile phones. So you told me that, remember? And it's all about this cultural universalism, like smileys in our mobile phones, and we have, say, 25 such symbols that we all understand. It doesn't matter whether you come from Europe, Latin America or Asia, you will recognize the smiley. And according to you, it means that we are already at the point when multiculturalism has exhausted itself, because now we are dealing with universal messaging all over the world. Just one little smiley. No, I didn't mean the emoticons. I was rather thinking about those internet memes. I don't know, maybe some of you know the troll faces and all sorts of faces from Age Comics, and those people who use the internet a lot, they think that they've been forever, although they've been around for several years. It's quite incredible. There is a drawing done by a Korean teenager, and then due to the internet, which is such a huge visual laboratory these days that tests all those billions and billions of contents and pictures and test their popularity. So the internet helps to take further decisions by the viewers, and I think sometimes this is how we can sometimes find really great manifestations of different emotions. So those are the pictures that speak to the minds of any person, regardless of the culture, regardless of the country. So the same story is told in such a way that everyone gets it, regardless of the biological parts of our brain. We all get it. And I think that this is the unique situation about the internet, that the processing capacity of the internet, that is how many different versions of visual arts is being tested all the time. So we are coming up with some sort of universal aesthetics. Well, maybe it's not very fortunate description of it, but we see that some visual emotions are quite universal. Maybe the scale of this phenomenon is quite big. I think that it's quite interesting that modern art, that this is the Hochkultur, the galleries, they will actually start using the internet tradition as well, I think. We can compare it to those situations when Hoch culture had to refresh itself using folk and ethnic culture, because what is going on in the internet right now, it's very much authentic folk culture of the day. So it's this bottom-up, fresh trend that refreshes the Hoch culture, the high culture. Okay. Now, let's get about to the most favorite subject in Poland, which is complaining. Complaining about the authorities. I'm kidding, don't worry. But Madam Mayor, just tell us, how is it about the local authorities in Poland and municipal authorities and city authorities? What do we do in cities about migrants? Do we have migration policies? Are our Polish cities ready to face the situation when all of a sudden a large group of migrants comes to that city? Are we ready, or are we still in the desert? Well, Witek said the truth. In fact, we have this Polish propensity to be anarchic, and our cities have not been taking part in any of the migration policies. policies, and Krakow has his own policy, which probably is legally dubious. We have our own ideas and approaches to migration policy, but the structure is pretty clear. There is the government level, and the government has its own territorial representation, and those are the voivodes who are the representatives of the Prime Minister, and they're responsible for the implementation of the migration policy, and it's only the state authorities that are due to do that. But there are cities who cannot represent the city abroad, and in fact cities are not allowed to run international politics, foreign relations. Of course, Krakow has 40 partner cities all over the world, and therefore Krakow is not subordinating to this principal line of subordination, but we built our partnership on the basis of local affairs, and so we may say that we are still within the remit of our basic duties, which is the development of our local community. So far, no one has criticized us for doing so, but in fact, we are sometimes trying to help the refugees, and then we were criticized for that by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. You see, several years ago we thought that we had that moral duty to help the refugees, but we also wanted to do it, and we wanted to join ICON, which is the international network of writers in exile, and none of the cities could become a member of ICON, but we thought that we could join it via the International Association of Libraries. So all those organizations act in the spirit of solidarity. They help the writers who are in the dire straits in their home countries, or if they're under threat. And we also know that when Poland was non-existent, most of the Polish literature was written in exile, so it was quite natural for us to join that International Cities of Refuge network immediately. And so a city became a member of the International Association, and we had to get an agreement from the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So whenever we want, for instance, to join the International Federation of Congresses or the International Federation, Ethnological Federation, whatever, we always must have an agreement of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so we have to write a motion and get the permission. And just like it was in other cases, usually we get a permission within 30 to 60 days, so it's quite speedy. However, in this particular case of the International Cities of Refuge network, we had to face the Migration Office, and the Migration Office said that we didn't have the power or the competence to join that international network, because actually the ICON status says that we would have a possibility of accepting a writer for a period of up to 1 year, and in fact we as the city could not provide housing for such a writer, because we can provide housing only to Polish citizens, and because we may, as the city authorities, grant only social housing to Polish citizens. So formally we could not help with the housing to such writers. We even couldn't enter into any contracts with the writer so as to pay for his work. So we did simply fictitious contracts for artistic work. So if there is a refugee, although officially is not a refugee, officially is a writer, and then what happens if that writer files an application for granting a refugee status or an asylum, and then of course it would become a financial issue, so the Minister of Foreign Affairs will have to make sure that the voivode would have the money to do so. Well, this writing there and back was lasting for 1 hour, for 1 year and a half. ICON could not understand that. Why is it that the city of Krakow simply couldn't sign an agreement with them? We tried not to explain that. We simply camped on accepting the writers, and initially we were doing it not really legally, but now we have finally become a city associated with ICON. We're not a member of it, we're an associated city. So yes, cities may play a role, but it is a wrong assumption. We are not allowed to do so. And in Poland, we can act due to our determination, and sometimes officials believe in different ideas and they simply want to do things, and so our officials are capable of doing the impossible to do the job. And another type of effective activity in Poland is acting by inertia. And I think the inertia principle is better, because the determination principle is not always effective, because determination sometimes is in fact highly dependent on one single person and his or her determination to act, which may be there for a year, 2 or 3. But inertia principle is better. All we've got to do is to be legalistic about it, have some rules, and then it will work. For instance, we as the city of Krakow started cooperating with one of the cultural institutions by in fact exceeding our powers and competences as the city, but we decided to go crazy, to be crazy about it. We simply tried to create the first strategy, the first ever in Poland, a strategy of countering xenophobia and anti-Semitism in the public spaces in the Polish cities. So we wrote that strategy and we made it a part of the social policy in Krakow. But I think it's quite important, although all the more that I cannot agree with the statement that this multiculturalism acts. We don't have it. We just don't have it. The city of Krakow is the city that has the highest migration factor, and more people come to live to Krakow than leave Krakow. So we have the highest immigration ratio in Poland, and I think that 40,000 of our residents, those are people who actually come to Krakow to work, and those are foreigners. So I think that 5% of the Krakow's community are migrants, and this is quite a visible part of our population. Of course, that is due to the fact that Krakow is the European center of business services. It's also the European center of IT services. So we have a plethora of IT specialists who come to Krakow to work, and somehow they change the image of the city. But their presence is due to the fact that those are highly educated people, and they just sit in their offices, they just work with their people, and they belong to this 4% of the people who are better positioned, more affluent, and they do not affect the general population of the city. We think it's great, but it isn't great, because in fact they're not very active. And in fact, when the presidential couple was here, it was the only situation when the TV and news channel was always present on the main market square in Krakow, and then they invited different politicians and invited me, and so we sat on the main market square in Krakow and we started talking about social problems. This is when we finally started talking about some internal tensions within the Polish society, not to mention multiculturalism. Excuse me. I'm sad about one thing, that this highly cultural city, which Krakow is, and it actually was a European capital of culture, we have this huge cultural heritage, but still in the city of Krakow, I see that you, or the town hall, has to run the strategy against violence, because there is more and more violence in the city.
Znaczy tutaj też
Okay, let me set things straight. A myth is developing that Krakow is a dangerous city. No, that's not true. There are 19 manslaughters a year, which compared to the Polish statistics is a third. Krakow is a safe city, yet for years we have diagnosed the problems that we want to liquidate. We are in this media trap. We have the team for combating illegal graffiti. We have teams for combating the stadium violence. We have the team and we develop policy to counter violence in public space. We catalog them and we call the problems which exist. They are not worse in Krakow than anywhere else, statistically speaking, because we meet the head of regional police. They are relatively smaller, our problems, I mean. We want to liquidate them and we want to counter them because they have to increase, because the social structure is going to change. Aren't you afraid in future that there will be ethnic violence? This is a problem that hasn't yet happened. No. Yes, I'm afraid that if something like that happens in Sweden or in Norway, we must realize that this will happen in Poland too, if the society is more and more internally differentiated. We will have to get ready to it, and this preparation covers a range of various activities and covers also public debate, involvement of local media. The media are very keen on the involvement of local community. There's a situation with Prąd Czerwony district, whether to agree to murals which are emblems of football clubs or not. Plenty of disputes and discussions continuing in the city, but thanks to us working for the last 2 years, we took this subject to the streets in a natural manner. It's going to be present in the media, seen there. Well, without this dispute, media in a way are hysterical, and it's good they do it because they emphasize certain problems. Sometimes when they do it like that, they don't diagnose the actual situation, but this is an element of building a certain information campaign and changing the attitudes. We hope that Krakow will be a good example for local authorities going forth to meet certain problems. Unfortunately, we have to be finishing because we are now lacking time. Thank you very much for participating in the panel. I hope that I'm afraid the microphone stopped working. Thank you very much, and now there is lunch.